Hello, thank you for joining us for a Duckhorn Portfolio webinar. I'm Kay Molaski. I'm the Senior Manager of Education and Trade Relations for our company, and I'm joined today by one of our many esteemed winemakers. This is Joseph Zarni.
Hello.
Joseph is the winemaker behind our Washington wines. And of course, if you've been following us, and I assume that you have, we've been making wine in Washington since 2012. We went up there initially and began the winery Canvasback. And in subsequent years, we started a second program that we call Greenwing. So today we're focused on the two upcoming releases from both Canvasback and Greenwing, both of them hailing from the 2022 vintage. So Joseph, we have the chance today to inform our own sales team and other viewers about these two wines and some of your thoughts about making wine in 2022 in Walla Walla. So what comes to mind when you think backwards a little bit to these two wines?
Uh, what I think back to is there was some tension in the vintage because it was a cooler vintage.
Mm-hmm.
We had delayed bud break, we had delayed flowering and fruit set and everything like that. So everybody was really set up for uh, compacted, like really compacted vintage, similar to what California had back in 23.
I was gonna say that sounds like 23 here.
Yeah, but actually, we had like a magic October that kind of
Mm-hmm.
smoothed all the tension out, allayed all of our fears because we had a beautiful October that just stayed in the 70s, mid 70s for like the entirety of October. So it gave us that wiggle room and that breathing room. We'd already started bringing in some early stuff, but like the middle to the end of season fruit, we were able to let hang, make room in the cellar to be able to bring in all the other stuff, and also allow those later ripening things to get ripe. Where that was also a consideration. Like these last little lots that we bring in might not be ripe, but everything was able to get ripe. We overall is a cooler vintage. I think only like 2 weeks of above 100-degree weather, which is fairly abnormal in Washington for the growing season. So it actually moderated the tannin development a lot. So it made really lush, rich, textural wines that are still powerful, but not as burly as like maybe the 2023 would have been,
Mm-hmm.
or 21 when we
Okay.
had the really hot summer.
Okay, I understand that. And then, the folks watching, as you know as well, we're making wine in all different pockets of California. And then with your two projects, here's where we're up in a completely different state. I think every season I always think about the fact that our Napa wineries might be pulling fruit in August, and you don't tend to start until usually about second, third week of September.
Yeah, typically September 10th to the 15th is when we bring in our Merlots or Syrahs. This, yeah, so and that tracks with the 2022 vintage. We started about, I believe it was the 16th of September
Mhm.
when we pulled in the first fruit
Yeah,
from Red Mountain.
it's interesting because your colleagues down here would have been 2 or 3 weeks into it by the time you actually even began.
I know.
Yep.
Yeah, it's always kind of somewhat satisfying to be like one of the last people to finish.
Hmm.
Uh, Katie always beats me though, in Central Coast, but that's how it is.
Yeah. I was saying to you before we got started, I'm kind of amazed looking at that 2022 Canvasback and realizing we've already made this wine for 10 years.
Hmm.
What do you think we've learned in 10 years about that region? What are a few things that you think, what do we know now that we didn't know in the first couple of years?
I feel like our partnerships within our vineyards and our facilities have grown and
Hmm.
matured, and like we have like a really strong foundation of trust with the growers that we source
Yeah.
from Canvasback specifically, even Greenwing, even though that's still pretty young.
Hmm.
Um, Canopy management, how to deal with heat in the summertime
Hmm.
in the vineyard so that the vine gets the heat and the sun that it needs, but without dehydrating it too much. And then always in the pursuit of refining our tannin management.
Correct.
Since Red Mountain is so abundant in tannin, if you just are clumsy with them, they get very aggressive and harsh
Hmm.
tannically.
Hmm.
And so over those 10 years, we've really just always are trying to tighten the bolts on refining that structure and refining those tannins so that they are silkier,
Yeah.
more pleasant, less astringent and drying.
Yeah, and I think I understand that, and I used to listen to your predecessor Brian talk about that too. I love that word burly
Mm.
because when you taste our wines from this region with some of our competitors, I know I'm probably biased, but I think critics are noticing that too. There's a refinement and a precision to what you're managing to pull out of there that isn't necessarily what you expect out of the region.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, back when people started making wine in Washington, you had to lay them down for like 10 plus years before they were enjoyable. But when they really started becoming like really enjoyable was when they needed the time similar to Old World Bordeaux, where you
Mm-hmm.
had to lay it down for 10 plus years for it to be approachable.
Mm-hmm.
It was a similar thing in Washington, and as a whole, that's gotten better. Canvasback specifically, like I said, we've really worked on refining that so that um, they are approachable upon release, but can still age for a decade or more.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we'll spend more time on Canvasback when we get here. For those of you that would ever be presenting these wines simultaneously, we would suggest that Greenwing be tasted prior to Canvasback. The Greenwing wine is probably even a little looser and a little bit more approachable than Canvasback, which has a little bit broader shoulders on it. So therefore, Greenwing first. This is the 2022 vintage of Greenwing, packaged as it has been since 2017 in that gorgeous label.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't drink the labels, but if they don't have a certain shelf appeal, it's harder to get the wine into the cart and get it onto the list. So I just want to point out that another one of those beautiful labels that the Duckhorn Wine Company is known to create. This is the 2022. We made our first vintage of Greenwing in 2017. I looked that up yesterday. What do you want us to know about this, Joseph?
Uh, Greenwing is, I guess in a word, it's just approachable. It's designed to be able to be that every man, every woman's, every person's Cabernet.
Mhm.
That like if you wanted it in the middle of the week with whatever you're eating, it's going to suffice. If you wanted to, it still stands up to a bit more of a sophisticated dining
Mhm.
experience. It does. We try to toe the line of being approachable for everybody, especially people who might have been turned off by really aggressive, heavy Cabernets, but
Mhm.
still want a red wine.
Mhm.
So I think we toe that line
Yeah.
pretty deftly. Um, what is also cool about Greenwing is since it is in the Columbia Valley, in the wider Columbia Valley, we get to source from all these other really nice sites of Washington outside of our little gem, our little diamond of Red Mountain
Mhm.
in Washington. And a lot of the vineyards that do really well in the Columbia Valley actually hug the Columbia River. We have in Washington, at least Eastern Washington, it's basically a desert. It is a desert. And we only reason why we are able to sustain any kind of agricultural and vines is because we have this giant Columbia River flowing down
Mhm.
through it. And people have, when we started cultivating vines and establishing a wine region, they did kind of hug the river. So the regions that this is coming from is from the Walloop Slope, which is more like central eastern Washington, and then also the Horseheaven Hills, which is farther to the west, more along the Columbia Gorge, kind of towing that borderline between Oregon and Washington. The Horseheaven Hills will still be, a few miles north of the border, up on a really high plateau. And then we also source from Walla Walla Valley, which a lot of the the vines there stemmed from sedimentary soils from the Walla Walla River as it came through the Blues. Uh, and then also there's a good whack of Red Mountain still in the Greenwing. We're able to allocate some of our precious Red Mountain grapes into Greenwing to really just give it some of those broader shoulders as well as give it some more sophistication and our
But you just ran through the sort of the cherry areas of Columbia Valley that
yeah.
this wine is anchored in.
Historical sourcing for grain wings. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Well, and then I love what you said too about 10 years has only strengthened the relationships with those that we're purchasing from and those other partners up there. So I
Mhm.
would imagine some of the folks that we're using to help produce this wine have been in at each vintage since it started in 17.
Yeah, specifically Cielo Cheval, Clipson,
Hmm.
and then Hedges have been some of our longest standing partners.
Hmm.
And the Shaw Group, which owns Quintessence Vineyards and a few other, or manages a few other vineyards on Red Mountain, they have been like our close allies. And what's important about developing those relationships is different clients have different specifications that they
Of
like to
course.
see in the vineyard, and they've been able to grow with that to the point where like they already know what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
So it's really just I go out there to inspect and be like, hey, good work, or like nudge them back if they've it's usually not anything terrible, but like,
Right.
hey, it's looking a little leafy over here, maybe we should get into that,
Hmm.
or little very minor nudgings to get it back to the straight and narrow.
Hmm.
But that's really just come from being able to work with these guys year over year.
Yeah, well, it's even built into the company mission statement when it talks about what are we aiming to do, and there's one bullet point about I'm paraphrasing, but be the type of company that other people want to work with.
Hmm.
So it helps that we're making great wine from that fruit. I'm sure your growers get a lot of pride out of being associated with this.
Yes.
That's great.
They also appreciate we pay our bills on time.
That's not a small thing. That is not a small thing. I see that the blend here is 85% Cabernet Sauvignon, 13% Malbec, and 2% Syrah. I have a feeling about this, but I think a buyer would love to hear you tell us, what does the Malbec bring and what does the Syrah bring?
Sure. The Malbec is for Washington. It is an excellent blender. It's also a great standalone grape.
Hmm.
But in a Cabernet, what it does is it provides a lot of color and glossiness,
Mm.
and it can, Cabernets are somewhat known for having a slight donut hole in the mid palate.
They can't have.
And Malbec, if you introduce it relatively early on, it can actually help. Like it's kind of like picturing a rough surface, like sandpaper or whatever, and if you
Hmm.
put like a finer layer of sand over, that's a bad analogy, but basically a rough surface that Malbec can kind of go and gloss it over, so it maintains the general shape of the wine,
Hmm.
but it adds like an elegance and a glossiness to the wine and fills in some of that donut hole that can be present in Cabernet, and also just gives it a nice little like earthy cracked pepper,
Yeah.
like purpley, more purple toned fruit.
Very good. I don't think that's a poor analogy at all. That actually makes sense. And I like how you're describing building the wine.
Mhm.
That you're constructing something. And then what is Syrah's role in the wine?
Adds a little earthiness to
Mm-hmm.
it. It can help aid some like mineral energy to it,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of like a brambly earth, somewhat forest floor kind of aspect to it. Just a touch, a little Syrah can go a long way,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's what we're typically thinking of when we think of blenders.
Okay. And then obviously folks always want to know about how do you approach aging something like this, Joe? Tell me give me a nugget on the kind of barrels and the length of time. What are you looking for there?
This is aged for 16 to 18 months. We
Mm-hmm.
do a little split between stainless steel aging and oak barrels.
Hmm.
Um, and that's, yeah, the oak barrels are more or less neutral. We try to do more like 30% new oak
Okay.
in the blend. Yeah, so 30% new oak. Try to maintain fruit integrity. We don't like it's kind of a mission for Canvasback and Greenwing, and I think winemakers as a whole, is to not let the oak walk all over the wine.
For sure.
We're trying to make that marriage of oak character and fruit character, and like making this like harmonious
Mm-hmm.
thing that is beautiful. Um, and that's what we try to do with Greenwing. So
Okay.
about 30% new oak is about where that walking line, that dividing line. The rest of it's neutral.
Okay. And just, of course, the primary audience for this is our sales folks, as you know, and they know, and you know, and I know that we have brought this wine down to a $20 retail price point, and that has caused a lot of energy around this
Mhm.
wine, and the selling opportunities have really kind of blossomed. So, what a gorgeous wine by the glass. Most accounts are running this at about $10, $11 by the glass, and I just think it's marvelous. We've opened up a lane there where we have not been.
Yeah, it's cool to be the pioneers to us
I don't
too.
think that's
But
wrong.
it's cool to be able to fill that niche in the portfolio and to be able to offer that wine at that price that people are wanting,
Mhm.
and being able to fulfill that is pretty neat.
It
It's fun.
is. It is. Well, and it's and Joe, we're we're a small D democratic company. Another mission is to have our fine wine sold and enjoyed
Hmm.
wherever fine wine is sold and enjoyed. So by maneuvering Greenwing just slightly, we're now finding a whole group of people that we didn't have a wine for. So I mean that's something to celebrate right there.
Hmm.
So let's give this a try and see what you got here in the 2022 Greenwing. I told you before we started filming that this always is a hit whenever I have a chance to show it to the trade guests that I'm working with.
Yeah, it's an appealing wine.
That's right.
So in the nose, you do get some nice like dark cherry, bean cherries,
Mm-hmm.
plum, a little bit of like black fruits actually coming out of
Mm-hmm.
here, blackberry, and you also get a nice complement of spice like cinnamon, clove,
Mm-hmm.
almost like a slight graham cracker, like cinnamon graham cracker thing.
And that's yes, and that Syrah earthy back note is definitely in there a little bit, like a fine dustiness that is I find that really attractive.
Yeah, like it's like the tasting note that I typically get in green room is like a rooibos tea, like a red tea leaf kind of
Mm-hmm.
red tea leaf note.
Mm-hmm.
That is usually it's very consistent in greenwing.
Mm. Great color too. Really, really pretty color. Mm.
And like I was saying when I was talking about the wine, the structure of the wine earlier,
Mm.
it's not a small wine,
No.
but it is very silky. It's approachable,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like anybody who is like allergic or not wanting to have a really big burly red wine would drink that and be like, oh, that's not so tannic. That's actually
Mm-hmm.
quite nice, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we strive to do. We strive to make it still a wine of presence and personality, but also be approachable for people that don't want a super strong, really tannic red
Well, it's and I like this is a quality that sometimes maybe is it's on the most dramatic, but I think it's undervalued, which is the idea of understated.
wine.
Everything doesn't have to be the loudest, the most alcoholic, the most powerful to get your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think about wine situationally. This is a wine that's going to get shown to a lot of even large national accounts that are placing wine into, let's say, private dining. So you're trying to put together a dinner party that has 50 people in it at a JW Marriott.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that you could pour for a group that has that many different levels of wine appreciators in the audience, and I think everyone would find something here to grab onto.
Right, and I mean the especially now at the new price point, the consumer that would be gravitating toward this has been more or less buying more like the lower to mid shelf
Just
Cabernets
very good point.
that we're hoping that they'll buy this or try it and be like, whoa, this is only like $2 a bottle more and it's so much better.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
look at that $2 break is going to put you in a completely different an intentionality
yeah.
and a caliber of winemaking. That's I love that. That's a great point.
So really hoping to bring the lower tier shelf buyer up
Yeah.
into the Greenwing price range that they're just ecstatic about the wine and they think it is it's also a pretty it's a strong Duckhorn tenant to always punch above your price class.
It's true.
And
It's true.
we're definitely trying to do that with Greenwing.
I would say mission accomplished. You guys are going to enjoy that a lot and continue to think about this wine thoughtfully and where does it fit best. This gives you something in your tool bag that wasn't there before. A Duckhorn Wine Company red wine at $20
Mm-hmm.
from a region of great merit that also is kind of an exciting region. There's a lot of energy and kind of buzz around Washington. So here's our entry. I love it.
Finally.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Really, really good, Joe. Okay, now the other thing we get to talk about today, the 10th vintage of Canvasback. That's just extraordinary to say. 10th vintage of Canvasback. In this instance, well, I'll let you talk about it. On the tech sheet here, the vineyard sourcing is actually listed. Some of the names I recognize as folks we've been working with for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I see our own Longwind property there. Remind folks about the kind of, I like the stair step of buying the property, planting it, first harvest, kind of bring us through that arc, because I think buying on Red Mountain was a intention to, we put down roots literally in the appellation that we had adopted.
Yeah, something that's that I mean that's very admirable of Duckhorn, and something that I think we've done with every brand is if we are establishing a new AVA or wine in a new AVA, we like to buy some vines for them. And so we started in 2012. We purchased our vineyard ground in 2013 and planted it in 2014. So in very short order, we had our estate vines growing, and also in short order, it was only in fourth leaf 2018 when we were able to make our first vineyard designated wine from Longmans, which
That's remarkable.
I think is really cool. And it's yeah, it's you. I wasn't expecting that of such young vines, but when we tasted what we had in barrel, we're like, I think this could be a wine,
Let's do it.
and let's do it. And what's been really fun is since we did bottle, we did start making the Longmans vineyard designate wine so early, we've actually been able to watch that wine evolve year over year as the vines have matured, which is always just fun to see, and it's been fun to track. And it's about 30% of our Red Mountain sourning
Is in this current
is in
vintage.
the current vintage, yeah. And that it usually is around that 30 to 40%, depending on how many cases we're producing in a given year. But yeah, it's 20 acres, and it produces anywhere from 60 to 80 tons, and that's about 30% of what we produce year over year.
Uh, Back me up for a second. I didn't quickly do the math on that. What do you see per ton on average on long winds?
We shoot for four.
About four per acre.
Four for the cab. It usually ends up somewhere like 3.5 to 4.5, depending on the year. Our Merlot is very vigorous. We actually have to really tailor that back, and we're happy with the 5 tons that we get off of that. It wants to grow like 9 if you just let it go feral, or let it go what it naturally wants to do. I don't know if like there's just a hot spot of nutrients or water in that zone where the Merlot is, but it just wants to go gangbusters.
And is that, and I should know this, is that Longwinds Vineyard just planted to Merlot and Cab? Is that right?
3 years ago, we grafted half of our Merlot Block 4 to Malbec.
Okay, so you have those three on the.
So we have about an acre of Malbec, and then about, what is that? 8 acres to, no, that's not true. About 5 acres to Merlot, and then the rest to Cab.
Okay. And I know that it is on a lower west-facing slope. I know that you've always been really pleased to say that not only did we manage to get into Red Mountain, despite the fact that the appellation is so small at about 4,000 acres, I believe that's right.
2,000.
2,000 acres, but we also got a very prime spot on Red Mountain. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. I think it's one of the most premium spots on Red Mountain. Actually, it is up. It's actually going up the slope of Red Mountain. There's really only maybe 1 or 2 vineyards planted higher than Longwinds. So we do have the aspect of elevation. We have a really long, gentle slope. It gets its name Longwinds because the rows are really long, and we get a really nice, gentle breeze almost always coming up from the Yakima River that flows right alongside Red Mountain. And so yeah, and it's right in the heart of Red Mountain. It's up in a higher elevation, so we get a lot of that protection from any kind of cold weather that we get. Red Mountain doesn't really get that cold in relative to the rest of the Columbia Valley, but yeah, it's just a great site.
And something that I've always found, especially those of us that maybe work and live in California, and we understand viticulture a little bit more through a California model. I've always thought it was fascinating that due to the soils, that phylloxera has never been a terrible problem in the Red Mountain region, and a lot of grapevines are planted on native roots, including our parcel. As far as unless I missed something, those are natively rooted vines, aren't they?
Yep, native roots.
That's fascinating.
The soils are so. Our talking point was that we don't have phylloxera in Washington, but that's been proven to be false.
Okay.
We do have phylloxera, but a lot of the areas, the soil is too sandy or too fine that the the phylloxera don't get to have as many generations to really inflict a lot of damage onto the vines.
Hmm.
And that's particular for Red Mountain and Longwinds, is that they never get to have a hold on the vines to like
Yeah.
actually do any damage.
That's good. Well, it's a whole. It's a very different place. I mean, from the generation of the soils, the way the water process is available, the difference, the diurnal swing that can go so far from one direction to another. You know, you take everything you know about winemaking in other parts of the country, but then you've got to be specific and think about Washington
Yeah.
and specifically Red Mountain.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a trip for me just driving up from Napa Valley up here to St. Helena this morning uh, to see vines on a valley floor that actually have like standing water in them
Yep.
right now at
Yep.
this time of year. I mean, that's wild. You
Mhm.
couldn't get away with that in Washington. The vines would get toast every winter. Our winters get too cold. We have to try to plant at a steeper aspect and a higher elevation. Otherwise, our vines won't make it year over year.
Yeah, it's a different place.
Yeah.
It's just a very different place. So with I was thinking about this too when you're talking about managing tannins and working towards suppleness and preventing the tannins from being so choppy. Walk us through this just a little bit, Joe. It would be the worst thing. Talk to this audience about after hand harvesting it, fruit delivered to the winery, not overly granularly, but kind of walk us through. We destem it, then what happens? And I want to
Sure.
talk about cap management and pump overs and things like that.
Sure. What we do, so it's the fruit's delivered, we crush it and destem it into a tank, and then we start fermentation soon. Like we don't, I know there's a lot of winemakers, and Renee is one of them, where they do cold soaks.
She likes that a lot.
She likes cold, and it's a great method, but it's not one that we have done
Mm-hmm.
more. It's just not something that we've done, and so what we will start fermentation the day after we crush.
Mm-hmm.
And really early on, we're trying to incorporate as much oxygen into the
Mhm.
caps as we can,
Mm-hmm.
typically by pump over, where we have a venturi that'll suck oxygen in as the pump is running and pumping the wine from the bottom of the tank over to the top of the cap. We have another couple methods to try to get oxygen into the wine via a pulsar, where we
Mhm.
stick a wand and blast compressed air into the cap and just kind of explodes it, and that breaks the cap. It aids in extraction, but it also gives a good whack of oxygen to the wine. Uh, we also do what's called délestage, which is where we drain the juice all the way from the tank into a different tank and then pump it back over to the cap. And that is also more of an extraction thing, but it gives a lot of oxygen as you're filling the tank back up. Because during normal pump overs, a cap is a couple feet thick
Mm-hmm.
of grapes, and when you do a standard pump over, it's really only disturbing the first 3 to 4 inches.
See that.
And then after that 3 to 4 inches, the wine finds the path of least resistance that they've always taken through the cap. So you're really only getting tiny streams of extraction through pump over. So through délestage and pulsar, we're able to break that cap up and kind of reset it so that the wine is forced to find new ways through the cap as it's pumped over, and that helps with oxygen exchange. It also helps with extraction and pulling out more flavors, pulling out more color, as well as tannin, which you have to be careful with.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's our main cap management through fermentation. Once it's dry, we'll press it off and put it into barrel and leave it in a warm room, unsulfured, for basically as long as we can, as long as we can take it. Usually around 6 to 10 weeks is what we're able to get away with. And what that allows to do is it allows the anthocyanin, or the color compounds of the wine, to bind to tannin chains. And if you're able to do it really early on, which is what we strive to do, you're able to cap off the tannin chains with color compounds where they're small, so they don't feel. And what that does is it allows you to feel the weight of the tannin, but it doesn't react with the proteins in your mouth, because tannin is an open-ended chain that wants to attach to anything protein, and that being your first saliva, then your gums, tongue, cheeks.
Yep.
So if we're able to cap those tannin chains off with color compounds, it allows the tannins to still be present, and but it refines them. It polishes them off where you can feel the weight. It doesn't react with your mouth quite as much, so it creates that refinement.
Yeah, you get that weight, but not necessarily the grit or the
grit,
scratch.
The aggressive, the harshness. Yeah.
Are some of the, and I feel like on a previous webinar between you and I, we got into this a little bit. Do you utilize some open top fermenters at Canvasback Winery? Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, we try to do as much as we can open top, but that also just allows more oxygen as you're doing the pump overs. And yeah, so open top fermenters. We also do closed top fermenters. We also will do some bin ferments, which is in like a 2-ton, 2-ton little bin where you have to punch it down instead of pump over.
So some of the folks watching have probably seen that technique. I know I've personally done it. If they've ever been around Pinot Noir, that's actually kind of what that sounds like and looks like.
Yeah, you take a like a tool that just has a wide base and you physically push the cap back into the wine.
Yeah.
And that's the best method that you can do if you're using a smaller fermentation vessel.
Okay, and then let's talk about this for a moment too. I asked you this when we were looking at the Greenwing wine. In this instance, we have 86% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Merlot, 5% Syrah, 3% Malbec, and 1% Cabernet Franc. That feels very Columbia Valley. Those Bordeaux varietals with just a spot of Syrah to it. Tell me what the Syrah's role is in the Canvasback wine.
Similar to the Greenwing. It just gives a little earthiness. The tannins in Syrah are very plush, so it can help soften the wine a little bit there too. But really just to add some like mineral energy and earthiness to the wine.
Okay. Well, it's got that almost deep purple tone to it. Really, really pretty from the start. Let's take this around the block.
Yeah, nice. It's pretty classic Red Mountain. Soaring red fruit,
I
like
was gonna say,
grenadine, raspberry, strawberry, cherry. It also has a
Grenadine.
it has an herbal component that's kind of like cherry cola, sarsaparilla, like a little bit of like clove anise that kind of contributes to that cherry cola-ness. And this smelled like a pretty classic just Red Mountain Cabernet.
And I like, you think about this wine in the context of the other Cabernets made in the company. Obviously, this is the only thing we have from this region, and it drinks as it should, like nothing else that we have in our own portfolio, and I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so richly textured, polished, refined, mouthfeel. Slightly darker fruit on the palate than on the nose. It leans more towards like damson plum, bean cherry, whereas like on the nose it's more like reindeer cherry and strawberry.
How Washington of it.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I know. And again, that structure is there, but it doesn't. I'm not feeling like the wine is overly tannic.
Not at all. Both of these are crying for food, Joe. And they both kind of a thought too. I think sometimes red wines don't get called out for this the way they probably should. The acidity on both of these wines is really kind of brisk and fresh. Really, really lovely. And I also get, I'm sure it has a little bit to do with the barrel program. There's a little bit of a caramel quality to it, and almost like a brown sugar or caramel bit on the edges of it. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, one of our main coopers is Orion, and that's kind of their go-to. They add a lot of spice, some caramel, dark chocolate, and some of those like clove and anise that lends to or reinforces the cherry cola of the Red Mountain.
Gorgeous.
And it's Orion is a pretty steady Eddie Cooper for Red Mountain. And again, I failed to mention through the aging cycle of the wines, we are racking this wine quite frequently.
I'm glad you're going to talk about that.
And that is also, so racking is taking the wine from the barrel, moving it into a tank, and the first few rackings that we do, we actually splash it to tank through the racking valve, which is slightly 18 inches higher than the bottom valve.
Mhm.
And what that allows it to do is like the first 500 gallons of that tank just to really get a lot of oxygen moving and splashing, and then the rest of the wine comes in and integrates that oxygen. And so that gives us an opportunity to apply oxygen to the wine, further refining those tannins. And it also helps us to refine our barrel programs too. If there's like a barrel that just isn't working, we can kick it out of
Yeah.
that specific blend, put it elsewhere where it will work,
Mhm.
and just further refine the wines. And we rack our Red Mountain wines typically 3 to 4 times within its life, which is I think about a time or two more than typical.
Yeah, I think some of our competitors and even internally about 2 racks in the time that it's in barrel would be
Mhm.
about typical.
Yeah.
Well, I understand you're applying some steps here that may not be applied to other wines in our portfolio, and that's appropriate because these wines are from a region that where you're the only guy there.
Yeah, and you need it just needs that extra it just needs that extra breathing time.
Hmm.
It needs the oxygen to breathe. It needs those sips to just create that nice polished texture.
I would be remiss if we didn't get a word or two out of you, Joseph, not just about these 22s, but tell me where your 23 wines are in the process, and what can our team anticipate when we get to those 23s?
Yeah, our 23s are getting ready for bottling.
Oh, they are?
Actually.
Okay.
We'll begin bottling in February
Hmm.
with our Merlot, Syrah, Malbecs, and
Hmm.
Rosé. Then we will bottle the Greenwing in March, and then our Red Mountain direct to consumer wines early May, and then the Red Mountain Cabernet in late May. So we're in the process, even though we just finished vintage,
Hmm.
we're actually turning our attention back to the 23s to put those final touches onto the wines that we're going to be bottling soon, as well as what we'll be bottling in a couple of months. And 23 was an excellent vintage. It the weather was about perfect. We didn't have any of the issues of like delayed bud break
Hmm.
or concern about a compacted vintage. It's almost picture perfect up in Washington.
Good for you.
Yeah, it was
Good for us.
good for us.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it was yeah. I think they're going to be uh, really well structured wines. There's going to be a little bit more body and structure than the 22s, but not that much. The color is insane in 2023.
Hmm.
It was a really really good color year. You get 2 days into fermentation, and it's marked like fully colored
Looks like
wine.
okay.
All right, cool. Don't have to work. Like let's try to keep this color.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, but yeah, it was a pretty idyllic vintage.
And
Washington.
just to keep you bouncing with where you are, I love the wine business. We're always working in the present, the past, and the future in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about 22s that are in bottle. We have 23s that are coming, and you have 24s that I wonder. Your team must be busy putting all the 24s to barrel. Is that the case?
Most are in barrel.
Good.
They are
Good for you.
now also finished with their secondary fermentation, malolactic fermentation, and we will be getting into our first rackings right after the holidays.
Okay.
So everything is kind of just put to bed for a little bit, and then after the first of the year, we'll start doing that first racking to really get the oxygen, the first sip of oxygen after barreling down, and really beginning the aging process then.
Great, great. I think we have covered a lot and really appreciate your time, Joseph. We appreciate everyone that viewed this with us today. The intention of all of this is to simply give you some talking points and a greater insight into the wines that we are calling out at any given time, and to give you a little bit of video access to the winemakers that make this company what it is. So thank you for your viewing time. Thank you for your salesmanship, and everyone have a really great day. Joseph, thank you for your time and the delicious wines.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good luck out there.